Dober večer in dobrodošli na, kaj mislim, da je to zdaj 10. večer letošnjega festivala Parada ponosa. V preteklih dneh festivala smo odprli precej enih tem, ki se jih v tej naši skupnosti sicer bolj poredko dotikamo ali pa se z njimi ne ukvarjamo tako intenzivno kot z drugimi. So vendarle pomembne in zato so tu, ne. In v tem kontekstu smo recimo govorili o romskih lezbikah, mislili smo LGBT populacijo v luči migrantske krize, poskušali smo artikulirati pozicijo lezbik znotraj LGBT skupnosti. Skratka, z različnih vidikov smo se dotikali multiplih diskriminacij. Danes pa dodajamo na seznam eno temo, za katero ne morem reči, da se je ne dotikamo, saj se nas prav direktno tiče in se z njo tudi intenzivno ukvarjamo. Skratka, tokrat se bomo lotili AIDSa in umetnosti. In nekako 35 let je od tistega nekega slavnega članka časopisnega, ki je napovedal prihod ene nove redke bolezni, ki danes ni niti malo nova, niti je redka, saj pač pandemično divja naokoli, a ne. In prav tako se za to bolezen pogosto zdi, da je nepremagljiva, a boj vendarle poteka in v resnici gre za boj združenih v jezi in poteka na mnogo ravneh, na družbeni, medicinski, politični, kulturni ravni. Predvsem pa poteka skupaj, združeno. In ko sem se začela malo bolj intenzivno ukvarjati s tem, o čemer se bomo pogovarjali danes, mi je seveda jasno v roke prišel tekst oziroma govor, ki ga je imel virusom, eden ustanoviteljev AIDSa leta 1988, in bi vam v bistvu z veseljem rada prebrala en stavek eno poved iz tega njegovega govora. In skratka, on je zapisal: AIDS krize bo nekega dne konec. Zapomnite si to. In ko pride ta dan, ko ta dan pride in mine, bodo na svetu živi ljudje. Geji, strejti, moški in ženske, črni in beli, ki bodo slišali zgodbo o grozljivi bolezni, ki je bila nekoč tu, v tej deželi in povsod na svetu, in da se je hrabra skupina ljudi uprla, vstala je in včasih dala svoja življenja, zato da bi lahko drugi živeli in bili svobodni. No, ne le, da bodo to zgodbo slišali, tudi gledali jo bodo, ne. Eno ključnih področji dela skupin kot je AIDSa je namreč dokumentiranje, dokumentaristika in arhiviranje tega procesa, tudi umetnost. Skratka, različne reprezentacije smrti, žalovanja, bolečine, nemoči, moči, predvsem dostojno prikazovanje ljudi, ki jih sistem in družba niti malo ne zaščitita. No, in iz vrst aktivistov, ki delujejo na prav ta način, prihaja naš današnji gost. Skratka, izjemna in res izjemna čast mi je, da na oder povabim režiserja, aktivista, dokumentarista in arhivista Jima Hubbarda. In pravila so pravila. Ne, po slovensko. Če kdo ne razume angleško, kaj ti pogovarjala se bova po angleško, zato da bo tako lažje teklo. Naj plis dvigne roko. Aha, tamle vi ne govorite angleško. Ja, ni problema, bomo si pomagali zdajle. Evo. Tukaj le naša Simona bo pomagala in vam bo čisto vse prevajala. Z največjim veseljem. Jim, welcome.
Oh, well,
How are you?
I'm tired. I've been traveling a lot. On Monday, I was in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is this little town on the end of the Cape Cod Peninsula, which, if you see the map of the United States, the state of Massachusetts has this thing hanging off it. Provincetown is at the end of that peninsula. It's an old whaling village that became a Portuguese town and now is a gay and lesbian resort. So it's interesting. But anyway, to get home, I had to take a ferry for an hour and a half on bumpy seas and then a 6-hour bus ride. And then the next day I got on an airplane and landed in Dusseldorf and then flew to Venice and then took a van here. So it's great to be here and be able to sit.
But it's not your first time in this area, right? It's your first time in Slovenia.
It's my first time in any of the former Yugoslavian countries. But I've been in Europe dozens of times. No.
Okay. I think I'm gonna ask this every 3 minutes. Is this really necessary? Since you just came from the United States, let's start with the situation there. How did the LGBT community in the States react to the homophobic attack in Orlando? You work with ACT UP a lot.
Right. So. Actually, because I was outside New York, and I feel as separated from it perhaps as you do. But what disturbed me most about the coverage was this attempt on the part of the media to use this smokescreen of Islamic terrorist attack, but to me, that it was a horrifying instance of homophobic anger and destruction, and also evidence of the extreme ease with which people who shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a gun can obtain automatic weapons. So masking these really inherent American problems with this Islamophobia is what it is. So that's one thing that disturbed me. But I guess it took me a long time to it seems like a long time. It's only a few days to try to sort out how I was feeling, and I feel that it was an attack against me and my community. That's the for me that's what's at bottom there.
Okay. Because we are quite short on time, I will just continue with your work. Since tonight we're going to see 4 of your earlier films, and tomorrow we are going to see the feature length United in Anger. I haven't seen most of these films, but what I did see, and the first thing that sort of popped out was the sort of poetic way of speaking about difficult subjects and in a political way. And this is definitely something I could say for elegy in the streets, which we will also see tonight. If I understand correctly, it's at once a memorial to Roger Jacobi and the display of some mass responses to AIDS epidemic. So it's both personal and political. And maybe you could explain to the audience, to all of us, who was Roger Jacobi and how did he affect your work?
Roger was a filmmaker, and we were lovers. Oh God, this is so long ago. We were lovers from 1977 to 1980, and he was the one who introduced me to self-processing of film. And this was a complete revelation to me that I was a student filmmaker at the time, and I had never heard of anyone processing his own film. And so when I saw his films, which are actually far more abstract than mine, his major influence is the abstract expressionist painters of the 50s. So his films tend to look like a moving Jackson Pollock. And, you know, I mean, so he was one of the essential people in my life. What happened, when AIDS first appeared, I decided I needed to make a film about it. But I didn't want to do what the mainstream US media was doing, which was, well, first of all, they would barge into people's hospital rooms, show people on their deathbeds, literally showing them in the worst light possible. They would, when they interviewed people, they backlit them so they were silhouetted, therefore reinforcing the stigma of having AIDS. So the presentation was just about the stigma of AIDS and homophobia. And so I wasn't going to make a film like that. But it was very difficult for, you know, what do you do? The first thing I started was I started filming a friend of mine who had AIDS. And, you know, it lasted about 3 days because he didn't want to have the camera in his face all the time, which is how I make films. But two things happened. One is Roger was diagnosed with AIDS in August of 1984 and died in November of 1985. So for the last year and a half of his life, I filmed him. And then when he died, I had all of his outtakes. And he filmed himself a lot, which is different from me. I usually appear once in a film. And so I very rarely film myself. But I had this large body of work portraying him and his life. And then the other thing that happened is that ACT UP appeared. So all of a sudden there was this beautiful, exciting, passionate, graphic, political response to the AIDS crisis. And since I'd been filming gay demonstrations since 1978, I knew how to film demonstrations, and so those two elements were combined, and I realized that this was an elegy, and what I tried to do is make a filmic equivalent of the poetic form elegy, which starts out as a response to the death of someone who is close to the poet, and uses that as an opportunity to make a larger political statement. So, to me, that's AIDS. And there are other elements, like there's a catalog of flowers and a procession of mourners and a visit to the underworld And all those elements appear in Elegy in the Streets.
Elegy in the Streets is a silent film. Could you maybe explain why?
Okay, good. So I get to prepare the audience. Yes, Elegy in the Streets is a 29-minute silent film. So, and I know that's an awful lot to ask of an audience, but there are several reasons why it's silent. The first reason is that it's a literalization of ACT UP's slogan, silence equals death. Another reason is that I was greatly influenced by the experimental filmmaker Stan Brakhage, who always made silent films. And just the notion that film is a visual medium. Paintings don't have soundtracks. Why should film? I've since modified that position, but that was an idea I had. And the other is that I come from New York, which is an extremely noisy place. You're constantly surrounded by noise, 24 hours a day. And so to have half an hour of silence is actually a treasure. And yeah, of course, here it has the added benefit of not having to be translated.
Well, and maybe in that way, the emotional response is not suggested to the audience, right? Because sound really affects that, right?
Right. This is something that irks me a great deal. Okay. In movies, the way music is generally used is to manipulate the audience into a specific and single emotional response to a moment of cinema. And what I wanted was for each member of the audience to have his or her own emotional response, so that it's not the response I want to evoke out of you. It's the response you actually have to what you're seeing on the screen.
Okay, so we're also going to see the 8-minute 2 Marches film, which sort of depicts the changes that occurred in the first decade of AIDS. Could you please explain, just in short, you don't have to prepare the audience, but just what it's about.
Okay, so the 2 marches that are depicted in this film are the first National March for Lesbian and Gay Rights in Washington, D.C., which took place in October of 1979. And the second march is the March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights that took place in 1987. So what the film is about is the change in the queer community in those 8 years, from a ragtag bunch of marches to like this incredibly organized, huge event that is also tremendously affected by the AIDS crisis at the time. And there is music in this. All the music in the film was music that actually was performed at the marches. So it's not the actual recording, because the film, the 79 march was actually filmed on Super 8 and blown up to 16, and the 87 march was filmed on 16. So the 2 marches itself is shown on 16 millimeter. So I just took recordings of songs that were performed at those marches and used them in the film.
Well, speaking of change, I mean, after all these years of observing what AIDS does, after thousands of that how do you understand how would you comment on the ignorance that still seems to be sort of present within the community when it comes to prevention? I mean, I know that in Slovenia, organizations are putting enormous efforts into conscious raising and trying to get people to use protection, and yet the number of people getting infected with HIV in Slovenia is on the rise. How would you comment on that?
Well, okay, first of all, I'm not going to comment on what's happening in Slovenia because I don't know anything about it. But, you know, in the US and in North America, I mean, the biggest problem now in terms of HIV prevention is the stigma. And it's, you know, it's just horrifying and remarkable to me that after 35 years that this stigma still exists. But in a way it's even worse. I mean, there's this huge turn towards criminalization. In Canada, it's national. They criminalize HIV. It's not even HIV transmission. That's the weird thing. It's about the fantasy of HIV transmission in the mind of straight people, because it's about forcing the person with HIV to declare that he is HIV positive before sex happens. So they don't even think about safe sex. So it has nothing to do with condom use. It has nothing to do with use of PrEP, or any other safe sex technique. It's just about this terrible notion and an unreal notion of the transmission of HIV. And to take a particular example, in the state of Iowa, which is the state right smack dab in the middle of the United States, a man was convicted of HIV. It wasn't even transmission. That's the thing. He didn't even transmit HIV, but he was convicted of it and given 30 years in prison for it. So, and that stigma is why people don't get tested. The story of HIV transmission has always been the same. It's been people who don't know they're positive infecting people who don't think they're at risk. And so it's the ignorance that does it, more than we know how to have safe sex. We know condoms work. We know PrEP works. But the problem is getting that information to people and having them feel that they can do it.
I read that you also hold lectures and sometimes workshops and so on. So how can, in your opinion, art help fight this kind of ignorance?
Oh, that was a question I wasn't prepared for. I don't know. I think the situation. This is what. Something that I was going to say before the screening of United in Anger. United in Anger is about a very particular time and a very particular place. But it's also a blueprint for effective grassroots political action. And you can't recreate what we did in the late 80s and the early 90s in New York and Washington. There would be no reason for you to. But you know what the political situation is here. And you know what needs to be fixed. And your responsibility is to figure out how to do it. And I hope that United in Anger acts as a catalyst for the political activists in the audience to figure out new and creative ways of making the change that's necessary, in where you live and how you live.
Okay. Another film we're going to see is called The Dance. Well, we are obviously again not going to prepare the audience, but could we please tell us a bit about this film? Who are the artists in the film, and if I understood correctly, they're also the authors of the music and so on.
Okay. The Dance is my music video. So I really hate music videos. I think, the way they are made is that people just throw images together without any notion of that images have meaning, and when you put two images or more than two images together, they have other meanings. And so I said, it is possible to combine music with visual imagery and increase the meaning and not, just surprise people. So Dan Martin and Michael Biello, who are the performers and the writers of the song, which is called The Dance, what happened is that they just called me up and said, hey, we're doing this performance piece and we'd like to make a movie of it. Would you like to do it? And it was an hour-long performance piece. And I said, do you have any idea how much it would cost to make an hour-long film of this? No. And I said, how about we do one song? So that's how it came to be, and we became great friends, and this is the movie that resulted.
Well, we were supposed to screen Memento Mori as well, but we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to screen Speak for Yourself, which is, in a way, a precursor of United Anger, right? And there are, I think, 7 or 8 activists speaking. Could you tell us who they are, why you chose them?
First, let me say why we're not showing Memento Mori. Memento Mori is a 17-minute, 16-millimeter CinemaScope film. It's very rare to make 16-millimeter CinemaScope. CinemaScope is, like a wide-angle film. And it involves special lenses, which they do have here. And I wish I could have shown it. But in thinking about it, I realized, first of all, the original of the film is lost. And so all that exists are the prints. And I just decided I have to be responsible and not show the film until it's preserved, properly preserved. And we can make new prints and digital transfers and show it once again. So that's why that's not being shown. Speak for Yourself was a video, the first videotape I made. It's made in 1988 and 1989. And what happened was that Video 8 was first introduced in 1988. And people didn't know what to do with it. Actually, what it was is it was the first video format where the cameras are about this big, right? And so it's the first time that, and it leads to that. I'll get there in a second. It's the first time that a relatively high quality video format is available to people who are generally middle class. So there was a huge explosion. Well, explosion is a little too big a word, but suddenly a lot of people could have cameras and make video, and that's why the video AIDS activist video movement happened, and why United in Anger is possible, because 40 or 50 people had video cameras and they were videotaping, and there were 1,000 hours of tape for me to edit down to the film. But when it was first when Video 8 was first introduced, nobody knew what to do with it, and the companies that were making the camera companies didn't think that people would buy this thing, and so a performance space in New York called The Kitchen did a grant where they gave away 8 cameras to people who submitted a grant proposal. And so I submitted this proposal that I was going to do an oral history of ACT UP, not really thinking that I would get it, but I did. So suddenly I had this video camera, and I started interviewing people. And these are 7. I think I actually interviewed 8 people who are, like really integral to ACT UP. At the end by the 8th interview, I had about 10.5 hours of videotape. And the filmmaker in me said, how the hell am I going to edit this? It was a huge misunderstanding on my part, that, thinking that the end product, the edited end product, was what was most important, where what actually is most important is the raw footage of all these interviews. So the ACT UP Oral History Project, which now has 187 interviews and 400 hours of those interviews, is something of a correction to that 25-year-old mistake. And the people in it are David France, who wrote the first article in the Village Voice. I mean, this may not sound important here, but it was the most important alternative weekly in the United States at the time, and they had not covered ACT UP for its first year of existence, and that was felt as a huge lack. And then Sarah Schulman and Maxine Wolf. Sarah Schulman and I do the ACT UP Oral History Project. We founded Mix together, so we've known each other for 30 years, more than 30 years. And Maxine is incredible old activist, has been doing grassroots political organizing since the 50s. Then Carl Sondlein and Alan Klein, who are two of the cutest boys you'd ever want to know. And who else is in it? Oh, and Greg, actually, the Greg Bordowitz one is edited out. It's really interesting. I shot them all hand-holding the camera, which is a big mistake. And the interview with Greg is 2 hours long, and 75% of it is aimed at his crotch. You could tell what was on my mind. And it ends with Robert Garcia, who is, the one person who I interviewed who died of AIDS. So, I think they speak for themselves.
Maybe just the last question before we go see the films, and maybe as an introduction to the tomorrow's films, which is about what being united can actually do. In my experience, I might be completely wrong, but in my experience, gay activists often try to hold a sort of a monopoly over the topic of AIDS activism in a sense of believing that their voice is the one that should be heard in the front lines. I mean, or when having a conversation with Jim Hubbard, for that matter. But is it really like that? I mean, in AIDSa seems to be quite specific in the way that in that organization it's not like that. And after all, you've been working with Sarah Schulman for so long. Marlene McCarthy was one of the founding members of Grand Fury, and there is Maxine Wolf, and so on and so on. So is that impression really true? Am I maybe completely wrong? What have the women then?
Well, you know, depending on what city in the United States you're talking about, there was often a separation between the lesbian movement and the gay male movement. You know, in some places it was not true at all. But and in New York, it's complicated. But the pertinent aspect is that, you know, ACT UP really was a coalition, and women were really an incredible, important part of it. And, you know, you'll see that in United in Anger. And also, you know, people of color increasingly became important members of ACT UP. So it was really a very diverse, more diverse organization than it's given credit for. And, you know, that speak for yourself line is really important, because one of the tenets of ACT UP was that everyone has the capacity to be a spokesperson. That what you need to be a spokesperson is to knowledge and to be prepared, and ACT UP always did that preparation, so that if you were in a demonstration and somebody walked up and pointed a microphone into your face, you could answer. So, everybody has the right and the responsibility to talk about these issues.
Okay, so thank you, Jim. Thank you.